everyone. This is Kate from the Your Courageous Life podcast, and this is still the Your Courageous Life podcast, but I am partnering with my friend Andy Sewell for a special 9-part series focusing exclusively on lessons from my book, The Courage Habit. Listen in as we talk about how you can apply the psychology of courage and the neuroscience of habit formation to your life to create lasting behavioral changes. If you've ever wondered how someone can learn the skill of being more courageous in their life, this special Courage Habit series that I'm embedding within the larger Your Courageous Life podcast is it. It's going to have a little Courage Habit themed intro, outro, but again, it's still the Your Courageous Life podcast, just a special little 9-part series where we do a deep dive into the courage habit and how you can apply it to your life. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Courage Habit Podcast, an exploration of the Courage Habit, the book and program designed to break the fear-based habits holding you back and replace them with the courage-based habits to enjoy the life you want. The Courage Habit was written by Kate Swoboda. She's a life coach, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, and director of the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program. In this limited series podcast, I'll be asking her questions about the book and her experiences teaching her techniques.
And he's Andy Sewell, an audio producer who has started a new career after 2 decades of corporate work. Andy is an amazing storyteller, he's ferociously curious, and he's someone who has read The Courage Habit. So he was the perfect person to ask about hosting the Courage Habit podcast. You can learn more about Andy at audioephemera.com.
Each episode of the series is a continuation of our conversation. If this is your first time listening, please subscribe to the podcast so you can start from the beginning. Thank you for joining us, and let's get back into the conversation. Kate, in getting ready for these conversations, I will often do something that I've always done in my professional and creative life, is create lists. I'm a Virgo. It's often described to me that I like to create lists of lists, and I honestly do. I have single-handedly kept Post-it notes and Sharpies and big pieces of paper on walls and all that industries in business because I just love the idea of the incomplete thought that just sits in a wall. There's something that for me means a lot about the idea of ruminating. And this last week, one experience I was having is I was down on myself because I'd had an entire day that I thought I'm going to get up. I don't have any plans or structured objectives to do for the day. So what I'm going to do is just sit down and write all my questions that I have for Kate. And I ended up getting distracted, doing my kind of saboteur routine where there was some other tasks, cleaning, some check-ins with family or other friends on phone. And eventually the day gets eaten away. And then I sit down and I started getting really defeatist with myself and saying, see, I told you, if you didn't start early in the morning, you were going to lose your momentum, you were going to lose your energy. But what I realized was I had been thinking about the questions that entire day, even as I was doing my other tasks that weren't related. And I was ruminating. And I felt better when I kind of did that double check-in with myself and stopped that inner critic of saying, you've wasted your day, you can no longer accomplish your goal. And instead I realized what I need personally is room for the question to kind of come up and then sit for a bit, and then I can divulge the answer over time. And it was just this really great win where I felt the saboteur did its job or tried to, and I fell for it by believing for a second that I had completely wasted a day. And then it kind of came back, and it was just such a win. I just wanted to share that with you, that I let it sit with me and it worked. So thanks for the process for that, but also would love to get your reaction to that experience.
Congratulations. That's my reaction. Yeah, that's how it goes. You got an insight. What I hear is that you had a plan for how you wanted it to go. That when you did not go according to plan, that it was the threads of the saboteur fear pattern that caused things not to go according to plan. And by plan, I don't mean the work of contemplating whatever questions you wanted to bring to podcast episodes. I mean the container for that work, the sitting down at a specific time, that plan.
Yeah.
So you had a plan for how you wanted it to go, which was sitting down at a specific time with a specific process. And then things didn't go according to that plan because of the saboteur pattern and the things you told yourself. And then you had the awareness to break that pattern and say, hold on a minute, I actually do want to sit down and do this. And your critic pops up and says, oh, you didn't do it according to the plan, da, 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 da. And you had the awareness to break that habit, that fear-based habit of the fear-based habit of if I beat myself up, then I'll be on task with my plan next time. Paused, got present, said, what's actually going on here? I'm not going to use speaking to myself with disrespect as the way that I get through this. And I'm also not going to use, oh, well, whatever, it's all cool, like whatever, saboteur pattern. Like I'm aware I had a plan, it was sabotaged. I'm aware I have a critic, it popped up. But then you came back to really the present moment, which is an evaluation of of who you are and how you want to approach this process. And as you started to reflect on that from that present moment space, you saw the places where the process, the container looked a little different than what you thought it was going to be, but that you had in fact shown up for yourself in a certain way. You had in fact been doing some level of preparation. Great. Welcome to being human. It's like, congratulations. That's the thing. And the hope would be just that in the future moving forward, it's like, oh yeah, it's a skill. You can learn the habit, you can learn the skill. And the hope is that in the future, it's just more like, oh, okay. I notice it a little faster next time. And then I make a decision sooner about how I want this process to go. That's all.
I think there's also something that I was protecting myself. It's kind of weird to unpack, but I also think I was protecting myself because I see a difference between tasks, things that have to get done or must get done, and then craft, which is where humans bring it in. And I was noticing that my task of, in order to conduct an interview, you have to have questions. In order to have a conversation, you have to have ideas and little boundaries that are slightly fungible, but here's the direction of the conversation is going to go. And I felt that task related exactly to the physical task of sitting down, enumerating those, writing them in order, tying them to pieces of text and doing all of that work. When in reality, all of that was happening inside my brain as I went about others' tasks that I needed to do for the day. But it was the craft. It was how my mind unpacks puzzles, how my mind develops questions, and how I was using the resource material to kind of shape that into a conversation. And that felt like a win for me. It felt really good.
Yeah. I mean, it's the separation of creativity and productivity. That, it's like, okay. And I have a similar kind of thing around writing. It's taken me so long to you can even hear a little bit of my own critic when I say it like that, like, God, kid, it's taking you so long to finally get it. But it's like, read it, please. It has taken me as long as it apparently needed to take. That's my reframe, to learn that I have to set aside the first 2 hours of the day for unstructured time if I am going to create freely. If I try to do the thing, I mean, I've read you read about the habits of successful people, and the first thing they do in the morning is they roll out of bed and they get a workout in, and they check their email, and they maintain inbox zero, and they I've tried to do all that, and I've forced myself to do all that, and it ultimately doesn't work for me because for me, creativity responds best to unstructured time. And by that, I don't just mean like nattering around and just kind of doing whatever, which can lead to a lot of wasted time. I'm actually referring to a conscious awareness of what you described. So in the mornings, most mornings, when I'm done with waking up and meditating, getting my kid fed and out the door for school, things like that, I pick up books, I read, I sometimes go for walks and listen to podcasts, but usually it's picking up books and reading or journaling and then seeing what that turns into. So I don't sit down with the day going, this is it. Today is the day I'm going to write about this, this, and this, this topic, XYZ. It's more like, what is it that calls to me? What is it that's pulled forth? And I think that we need some level of respect that, we all have different processes. There are some people who create best when they make like an outline and then they work from that outline. That's always been for me, historically, too structured, too rigid. I start having like a magnetic pull to almost like wanting to do something different, like resisting, it just sets up resistance. If I absolutely have to sit down and do something according to a structure, I have the skill to do it. It's, I think it's something that, the way my coach Leanne put it was that maturity, part of maturity, and I feel like a lot of our conversations center around this concept of maturity, and it infiltrates into my own work too. But part of maturity is accruing tools and knowing when to use them at the right time. So it's not that, for instance, outlines are bad. It's just, is that the only tool that you have for creating? And if it's not working for you, or whatever rigid structure would be for someone, which is kind of what you're talking about too, like this rigid structure that with the container for how the work is essentially produced. So it's like, if that's the only tool you've got and it's not working for you, at some point, people get burned out or they just quit or they da-da-da-da-da. Let's expand the skill set. If Oprah calls me tomorrow and wants me to talk on a specific topic, it's really good that I have the skill set to be able to sit down and go, okay, got to get an outline together, right? Because and I want to do this. And I'm excited. But if that doesn't work for me on a regular basis, if that doesn't work for you on a regular basis, expanding your skill set is important. So I'll turn it back to your example. Same thing, if Oprah wanted you to do some sound engineering and interview her, my guess is that you'd be kind of excited about that. And if she says, I need to see an outline of what you plan to cover before we do this, it's good that you have the ability to say, I better get my butt in that seat and make that outline. But that's a tool you just want to use in that circumstance, it sounds like. It sounds like the rest of the time, the process you want, the creative process you want, is to say, I need some unstructured time. And I want to consider things in the background of my life. And that's actually what's going to allow something to come forth that works better for me.
I also think one of the skills that I brought in from my 18 years of working in legal services was when you are in an on-demand service where a client is going to ask you to do something, and it can often be at a moment's notice, you need to drop things and respond to things because there's an urgency with it that's just part of the economic relationship you have in a service relationship. You have to be a Swiss Army knife. That was the kind of example that was presented to me, and I really took that to heart. You have to be able to have access to tools that are ready to be used, not only for their own purpose, but for maybe creative purposes or in tandem to get the result you're looking for in an effective way. And sometimes the most direct route is not always easy. So writing the outline or using a template from what was done before isn't always going to get you there. It was comforting a lot of times because it really cut down on the anxiety of being able to deliver what my client was looking for. I could hand them something that was very bespoke and very specific for them, but was also something that I had readily available. I didn't have to invent the wheel again every time I was asked to do something. So that was a resource, was to be prepared and ready to do that. Another was from my early college life, as I was in theater a lot and I studied improv. And it doesn't happen all the time, but I've noticed the ability to be nimble, especially in my current profession where I effectively talk or listen for a living. You have to be nimble. Conversations are not scripted. And therefore, I don't write scripts per se. If I need to say something exact, I will write it exactly. But I tend to stay away from that. And I've learned that even though those are somewhat against conventional wisdom, the Boy Scout of always be prepared in me says you have to have some idea. The way that preparation gets processed in my body and in my mind is to let it kind of mill about. And it also helps if that environment that I'm milling about has the right amount of stimulus that'll keep my mind going. A white room with a desk, a pencil, and a piece of paper, I'm going to be the least productive. In a room that has a lot of stimulation, I'm going to be the most productive.
And that's the beauty of knowing what works best for you, because until my recent move, my office was completely white.
Was it really?
Yes. I used to, when people would come over, actually, I don't know if we ever did like a home tour thing when we would have dinner parties and have you over.
I never saw the like the work cave in the garage, but I did see the front of the garage, which was absolutely about color.
Yeah, that was Andy, my husband Andy's space.
Yeah.
So my office, all white. I had a white couch, a white rug, a white coffee table, a white desk. There was the only color in the room was a painting. Well, two of them that are like a pair. And my joke when I would give people the home tour and they would see my office, because it's pretty striking, like it's like all white. My joke would be, "Welcome to the sanitarium." But I love white on white design. I have a Pinterest board called Minimalism that is all white on white design. Like creamy shades of white. I have design home decor books that are all about white on white design. So this is a perfect example. And I love that you brought it up, of people working really differently. And the other funny thing about that is that even though my office is all white, what you would think of is like stark minimalism, everything tucked in its place. No, I'm so messy. I'm not dirty, but I'm messy. My husband, who's all about the color, and there's so much color everywhere, he's so neat. He's so neat. So people need different things. And when you were describing your process, I can't remember where I've heard this, though my guess would be that it's from reading books like Tim Ferriss's Tribe of Mentors, which is an interview of different people and what their processes are like and what makes them tick. And I swear I've heard stories of scientists, lawyers, people who have these very brainy professions, doing things like playing with a Rubik's Cube while working their way through a complex legal issue or an equation or a scientific thing. And I think that's really similar to what you're describing. The one thing I would say is important, and this is tied to habit formation, is having a set time of sitting down to create. I have found that most people are more successful when there's a pretty consistent time of day or hour, or if not a day or hour, like a keystone habit that tripwires the next thing. So every time I happen to be at this coffee shop, I give myself an extra, of course, in a post-pandemic world, I give myself an extra 30 minutes because I'm going to sit down and I'm going to jot down ideas for the next time I do X, Y, Z. So even if you go to the coffee shop always at different times of day, if being at the coffee shop is the thing that tripwires the habit for you to write down your ideas, great. So it's something like that. But again, most people that I've met, it's like if I have a time of day that's dedicated to my creative work, that tends to keep people more accountable, kind of like Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art.
I almost am fully signed up on that, other than I have noticed that when I say something like I'm going to put a restriction of 3 hours or whatever the thing might be, and I'm as thoughtful as to say what really needs to get done only takes this amount of time, but I'm going to allow myself more than that time so that I can start and stop. I can try, I can, like jot things on the side, like you were saying. But when I tell myself that, not always, but pretty much invariably, if it takes an hour to get something done and I've given myself 3 hours to allow that process to happen, around 59 minutes left is when all of a sudden the saboteur somehow disappears and the panic monster comes in and says, you have to do it now and you have to focus on it. I will say that a lot of times it works. And that kind of pressure of time, arbitrary as it might be, it really motivates me. But I forget to celebrate the previous time it took to kind of get myself ready to go into that gauntlet to get it done before the deadline.
Well, we got to separate productivity and creativity with that. What I'm referring to with having a regular time is pure creativity. Creativity it's wild. You don't know what's going to happen. It's jotting down the ideas. I'm talking about setting aside, like if you want to write a book, productivity is I'm writing chapter 5 today. Creativity is I'm going to start writing it for this allotted time I've set aside for myself and see what happens.
Okay.
So that's the pressure I think comes in with productivity. I have to have a final product. I have to have a thing that I can actually hand over to you. Creativity is separate from that. And the thing I'm encouraging you and everyone listening to do is to, because I've seen it be the thing that tends to bring about the most success, is to set aside that time for the creative process. So anything can happen within that container, those 3 hours. You don't have to buckle down at 59 minutes to the end of it and go, oh God, now the pressure's on, got to produce. No, like that's just the creativity time.
I think that's a good thought, because that probably is going to end up squeezing my productivity into a time where it's not going to have the space it needs to mature fully.
Or not. Sometimes the more space and room we leave for the creative process, it's like the metaphor of the seed that's germinating under the surface. I think the creative process is very much that. And productivity is the moment that the seed shoots up and becomes a stem of whatever is to grow. Now it's taking shape that people can see, that can be influenced by the elements above the surface. So there's the creative process, which is just, getting it all down. Here's what I'm thinking. Wild. I'm kind of just nattering about with a Rubik's Cube. And what if we tried this? I don't know, maybe not. And what if we tried that? Or it's it doesn't always have to be an isolated process. My personal intellectual orgasm would be like to have a regular Bloomsbury group, which is like to me, that is like I'm very introverted, but I love that like jazz music playing, interchange of ideas of like one person says this and somebody else is like, but what about that article that was in the New York Times? And somebody's like, I read that article, but then this other person had this thought. And somebody was like, true, theoretically that could work. But in my personal experience, I love that. That's my fave. So it's, however it looks, it's setting aside the time for it. So if it's, I'm going to sit down and write, if it's, this is the time when I get together with my Bloomsbury group. It's not about, I have to have a final product. Final product comes later. We take the ideas, we got to distill them. At some point, you got to ship, right? You got to ship the product out.
Yeah.
The process, though, for the creative process is different than the productive process.
One other thought that I had was this idea that the moment has passed or somebody else has already done this. And we've talked about this before. There's just so many people and so many ideas and so many actions in the world that it's impossible to think that you're always going to come up with the first, the most unique, the most innovative solution. You might very well, and that's not a bad goal to be setting for yourself. But to stop all effort when you either discover that somebody else has done something, even if it's been historical or if it's somebody in your contemporary world that's done something, is really kind of a trip up. And I was thinking this in terms of when you kind of get together with people that are in similar interests, like in a focus group or some sort of boot camp. A number of years ago, I was invited to participate in a audio producers boot camp. And we all traveled. There was, I think, 12 of us, and we all traveled from all over the United States. And actually a couple were international. And we all landed up in Nashville, and we spent a week together and working on our own projects, but with the same mentors and a couple of structured lessons on each day. But for the most part, it was a retreat to produce a piece that we were going to air on public radio in Nashville. And that was both a great chance to meet other people that I would never cross paths with who were also trying to do the same thing. And it was a big shock to my system that, other people have these ideas as well. Other people have these same problems and have different solutions to it. And it questioned my own solutions to things. But at the end of it, it was a great feeling because that ended up becoming part of a community that I could rely on. And that trust it took for me to go out and seek people who are doing similar things. I was rewarded more than I was expecting it, creating that community out of it and getting over the feeling of the moment has passed. It's too bad. You had a good idea. It was sure worth it, but somebody else beat you to it. I think that we learn these lessons when we go out and try things rather than getting the information that somebody else has done it and just kind of, oh, shucks, I guess that effort is gone. Connecting it with people and making them real and realize your effort is not wasted is always a benefit. And to be frank, I just kept going with my project. I didn't care that other people had done similar things, and no one's the wiser. We both benefit from that.
Well, it hasn't been done by you. I mean, I'm very aware. I'm not the only person who has written a book on habits,
Yeah.
I'm very aware I'm not the only person who talks about courage, but I'm the only person with my particular tonality, lens, life experience, all of that. I mean, I find I'm not talking about the critic internally, but the sort of like arts critic. Oh, that's just so derivative. Well, Everything's derivative. I mean, come on. Like, how many love songs come out every single year? How many, ooh, shocker, boy meets girl, or boy meets boy, or girl meets girl, or non-binary meets non-binary. But in essence, somebody meets somebody, they fall in love, something happens, they think they can't be together. Turns out it was all a misunderstanding. We can be together. They live happily ever after.
Well, that sounds so familiar.
Movie. I know. Where have I heard that before? It's like the joke of, if you work at a bookstore, when somebody walks in and they're like, I can't remember the title of the author. Can you help me? It's like this book and like these people and like they go on a trip. And then it's just like, what? Everything's derivative. There's nothing new under the sun. But there is this moment here and now in this cultural context. And different people speak to different people for different reasons. I'll give an example. The Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. That book is like a international bestseller. Everybody loves it. Don't know why. It's never taken up residence in my soul. It's never been like, oh my God, this is the book. Pema Chodron's When Things Fall Apart. If I was stuck on a desert island, that's the only book and I could only pick one book, that'd be the one. Coincidentally, it'd be a very good one if I was stuck on a desert island, but When Things Fall Apart. But that is a book I have read and reread and dog-eared and underlined so many times. And I've met people who are like, it's, everything's derivative. Sometimes I think as a culture, right now, we're struggling to even figure out the difference between derivative appropriation and what is just out there in the zeitgeist of a society and doesn't even belong to anyone. And these are hard questions because I've absolutely seen things that I'm like, oh yeah, that's appropriation. You and I have talked about Petaluma, which the indigenous Native American tribes in Petaluma were the Miwok people. And there was this real estate developer who wanted to come into Petaluma, California and take a plot of land and make a Miwok village in which they completely would be appropriating Miwok culture to make these buildings and symbols and the ethos of the Miwok culture. But like, they have no actual interest in the Miwok culture or giving back to the Miwok culture or learning about the Miwok culture. So, there are things like that it's like, okay, that's really clear appropriation. But sometimes when I read about things like fashion choices, oh, that's an appropriation of a culture. I don't know that we can say that at this point. There is a certain level of that's happened. And the same thing is true with ideas. People hate on Rachel Hollis. Oh, she just takes all her ideas from other people. Rachel Hollis, a very popular self-help person. And I'm just like, well, what do you mean? Like, because she says that it's important to, I think one of her things is like, every day you should drink water, meditate, and exercise. Like there's certain daily habits. I say the same thing. I didn't get that from Rachel Hollis. Somebody told me that I was copying Rachel Hollis because a hand signal that I use when facilitating is the sign language for I love you. which is when you have your thumb out, your pointing finger, and your pinky finger up, but your middle finger and your ring finger are down. And you can look it up online. And I use that to get people's attention and things like that when facilitating. Unbeknownst to me, Rachel Hollis does the same thing. Oh, you're copying off Rachel Hollis. No, I'll actually tell you who I'm copying off of is the Challenge Day organization, which is where I got that tool from. They have no problem with me using it. They predate Rachel Hollis, so she could have learned it from I don't think she's copying anybody either, but it's a hand signal. It's a hand signal. Like that's all it is. So, okay. You might end up deciding to delete that whole soapbox. Let's go back to so part of the reason I think that soapbox is valuable is because the logic behind somebody else already did it is really rooted in this idea that if you try to do the same thing, you're like this copycat or bad person. That's actually unoriginal. Yeah, I'm unoriginal.
And have a no value for contributing something that's already been out there.
Yeah. And it's to me, some level of this is, like I said, we're still figuring it out and learning it, because 100% there are examples of things where I go, yeah, to me, I see that and I go, that is such appropriation and it does not respect the place from whence it came. And then there are other things where I go, you're not unoriginal. You're taking ideas, you're amalgamating them together, and it is what it is, and it's your take on an old idea, because again, there's nothing new under the sun.
One of the statements that I have, I'm thinking about putting this on in a permanent Post-it note and taping it completely down, is how many people have done what you're doing, and then underneath that putting none, because the context of getting to where you are, the history you needed to have, all the experiences, the thoughts, the tried and failed, the tried and succeeded, the tried and learned actions you needed to get to where you're even at, is only in your own life. It's not in somebody else's. Even if you had a twin who had the exact same experiences, you're never going to have the same reaction to it. And that feeling of that's derivative. Yes, in the art critic world, I think that there is some things that can have an objective. Andy Warhol made an entire very successful and very popular and long-lasting career on making derivative works because that was the point of it. So there's a little bit of build of architecture in recreating something to show that you could recreate culture, which I think was one of the points. But it was definitely something that he invented himself, and only he came up with that day and put it forward, and therefore kind of set the tone. When we do it internally, and you realize you're the only one that has done it in your experience, you're just contributing, and it's just for yourself. The critic comes in, the external critic comes in and looks at it and makes that statement because they're trying to draw a parallel, and that should be a compliment. Oh, I noticed that you're using this hand signal that somebody else who also has an audience, a following, a success, a well-intended message out does the same thing. Wow, those are both positive things. That seems that symbol is related, but not the same. And I think that we all benefit when we recognize commonality rather than isolating that originality is the only thing we want to see.
I think it's just, where do you want to put your focus? Because I don't really have an interest in putting my focus on where Rachel Hollis got her ideas or where you got yours or any of that. It's, and an example I'd give of that is at the SF MoMA, there is a canvas that is painted white and one right beside it. Yeah. And there's one right beside it that's painted black. And when I first saw that canvas, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, should I paint, like, wait, what? And then you read the little placard next to it, and it talks about how the artist, I apologize, I don't know who the artist is, their intention was to create meaning around the fact that the viewer of this white and this black canvas will project whatever meaning they want to onto the art, and that projection of meaning is the art. There's another installation where, as far as I can best tell, it just looks like a bunch of bent coat hangers, metal coat hangers, like in different kind of shapes. And light is projected on them to create shadows on the wall. I'm less interested in going, oh my God, and I'm more just like, well, good on you. Cause I'm guessing you got paid some good money for that to show up in the SF MoMA. Wish I'd had that idea before you. Wish I'd had, like, all right. But like, come on, what can be more derivative or unoriginal than a white canvas? Well, they have their own point. And it's not for me. My favorite piece in the SF MoMA is Femme Chapeau by Matisse. But very different piece. But it's just I think that there's what anyone might be hearing in my voice right now. What's coming up for me around this discussion is I've just seen so many great creative people feel like their ideas are squashed because there are so many people in the world ready to pounce at a moment's notice and tell them how their idea sucks because it's already been done before in some other iteration, as if they themselves, the external critic, has ever come up with anything that has no hint of being rooted or based in something else. And that, like, I have a mama bear reaction to that. I'm kind of like, don't you mess with this person who's trying to do this great, it's the part of me that is very coachy, I guess, like, no, you don't get to bully my friend, who's just trying to do what they're trying to do and create some joy through something that is meaningful to them in the world. Stop it. So that's what's coming up for me. I'm getting very mama bear.
I had a similar experience in Chicago years and years ago where I had a critic, and it was a theater critic, comment on a play that I was involved in the production. And they said essentially the same things, that this is derivative. The same production was mounted 2 years ago by this theater group, and it was done better because they did the following things. And this had none of those elements in it. So therefore, it's not as good as it was 2 years ago when I saw it. And my thought was, wow, that critic is doing a really good job of their job of criticizing. But that's it. It doesn't affect my choice and my view. And I think it came because it was such a stark difference to what I was expecting the reception to be. But it also came from a realization of that person has a job, which is to point out similarities and point out differences and then express their opinion. And they're doing a really good job of it. Unfortunately, it's how other people read that criticism and then make their choices that it really should be my concern, if any. Not really one person having a disagreement. Okay, that's great. I wasn't expecting a round of applause and standing ovation from everybody forever and ever. I was just expecting some reaction, and I certainly got it. A large range of reactions, but good for me that I got reactions out of it nonetheless.
Good things to notice here. Where do we give our power away? And
exactly.
Thus our sense of sovereignty and peace of mind with it. And next thing to notice would be, so Andy, did you survive that?
I did.
Are you okay?
I'm perfectly fine.
Then great. You've already, there's the proof that you can survive these things. And it, those are the things I try to lean on in the moments when it's like, okay, someone might not like it. Has anybody ever not liked my stuff before? Oh yeah. And, did I live to tell the tale? Yeah. There was a friend of mine, the artist Carrie Smith, Keri Smith, who's had a number of wonderful, delightful books come out. And she once told me, I haven't talked to her in years, but she once told me a story about growing up. Her mother, I think it was her mother that she said, or maybe she was somebody else's story. I don't know. But the phrase was basically somebody saying, is there blood? No? Then you're okay. And I think that's a wonderful, funny thing to remember. Like, yeah. I'm going to try this thing. Oh man, they didn't like it. Well, is there blood? No? Then I'm actually okay.
Similarly, I used to say in the legal services profession, I'm not doing brain surgery. Nobody is going to die at the hands of my efforts. I can move commas around. I can use different words. I can change things around. But the great thing about a lot of those intellectual professions is you can always reshape it. You always have a chance to go back to it. If you worked in some other industry, like surgery, you don't really get a second go around. It's a different set of rules. And if you are imposing those very strict, narrow rules on your own self, you're really limiting your potential.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One other thing I learned was that it's okay to break the rules a little bit. And sometimes I can even change that and make the rules a lot. The reason why I say break the rules a little bit is because my internal saboteur will often point out where I've kind of fallen off the tracks. I either had my own plan or there's a guide telling me which way to go, and I fall off the rails. And I feel like, well, there you go. See, because you didn't shore up against here, this puzzle piece doesn't fit to its next neighbor puzzle piece. The whole puzzle's gone. And I've learned to just go, exactly, because my approach to things is to break the rules. I like observing rules, understanding them, and then seeing opportunity to still get what I want, besides the fact that I've slightly gone around a rule or a convention. I don't mean laws. I just mean mostly how process goes. And that has been a gem to use against my inner saboteur, which is to say, of course, I didn't do it the way it was expected to do, because I don't do things the way they're expected to do. And if anything, it just helps my momentum keep going. And I've been feeling a lot of success out of that experience.
Great. I'm glad. Yeah.
Do you see benefit in that, where there's a little bit of I don't know what the opposite of rigidity, but fluidity. There's some fluidity in seeing how things should be done in that early planning stage, and then just letting however the results lie. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, it's the separation of creativity and productivity again, they get mixed up when we get attached to an outcome. Like, I really want to have this thing to show for it for this time. It's okay. So where's the space for it to just be messy, fluid? It doesn't have to turn out a certain way. And I might end up throwing away everything I just did if I find out that I need to iterate in a different direction rather than stay attached to it and try to have this or that outcome. But I think what you're kind of getting at is, how do we have that space for that? I think what I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, is that it's something around, how do I want to create that space for free form, because what I notice is that my saboteur is not as activated when I create the free form space. But at some point I do actually have to buckle down and go into productivity. And that might be when my saboteur pops up. Is it something like that?
It is. It's kind of going from a mold or kind of template that we've talked about before. And I often will feel uninspired by a template or a mold because maybe I see a particular problem with that. This is the way things have always been done. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. This is where you put things. This is the order in which things go. And I feel restricted. So I'll kind of maybe start from the back, or I'll start from the middle, or I'll do something that is just whatever my attention might lie in. And I get comfort from that. And it's just telling myself, yeah, I know we're not supposed to start at the beginning. I know we're supposed to start at the beginning, but I'm not going to. And I often overcome that feeling of, you're breaking the rules. You're operating outside the rules pretty quickly. And it feels like a little celebration of, I've made the critic reframe and listen and allow me to progress, but also I'm further proving my point that there isn't one way to do any given task or goal. There's a multitude of ways to get to where you want to go, and exploring all those in different ways is how you develop your approach, and it's how you make your little signature on everything. And it's counterintuitive in my head that the critic is trying to protect me by making me do things that are in order, but it's reinforcing when my actual activity and my best self goes outside of the order and still gets the result that I want. Overly complicated, but basically I find myself tripping myself up where the inner critic will both tell me, follow the rules, and then also try to encourage me to not follow the rules. And so I kind of have to balance in between the two voices. Maybe better said it. Go ahead.
Well, what I hear in what you share is that the critic really wants two things. The shadow of what the critic wants, the kind of like fear-based desire from the critic, is to be in control. That's like what the critic's going to go for first. And that's where you got to do it according to the template. Why didn't you do it according to the template? But then what I also hear is that the critic wants something else. I think this is generally true for people, but that's like a more solution-based, courage-based kind of a aspect of the critic, which is to feel free. So the critic is trying to go, well, I want to be in control, but I also want to feel free. And this is part of the complexity of being human, which is wanting two things at the same time that in some ways are diametrically opposed or not possible.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like what you're doing is you're saying to yourself, there's this, I know that if I listen to the critic and I try to control everything, the work will feel stagnant and it won't feel good, or I'll have a creative block. I also understand, it sounds like on some intuitive level, you understand that your critic really is wanting freedom.
Yes.
So what I hear in the example of how you've been trying to set it up, and this is pretty common as well, and I love it when those things are found. So let's put this in the show as like, this is a takeaway. If you struggle with a saboteur critic, is like, try to get to what the critic really is wanting, be aware of the saboteur patterns, and see if there's a kind of off the cuff, avant-garde, out of the box. I'm not sure which of those I want to ultimately commit to, apparently, approach to the creative act that isn't going to make the critic feel so controlled. And the metaphor that was given to me by my coach, Leanne Raymond, was actually related to a discussion of creativity and productivity and the necessity of separating out the two, was that you can't treat your creativity like, if you're in a field with a wild horse, you cannot, that horse is not going to come anywhere near you if you grab a saddle and you're like, that's it, get over here, I need to put you to work, right? That horse is going to be like, I don't think so, run away. And then you will exhaust yourself trying to grab that horse and put the saddle on. But if you slow down a little bit, don't try to have the horse and saddle, let's get to work. Let the horse come to you. Nourish it, say nice things to it, give it food, all of that. It might settle down enough that you could put a saddle on it and go for a ride. So I like that metaphor. And it was one of those ones that the first time I heard it, I was kind of having this experience of, I know that this person is speaking English to me, but what the hell are you saying?
Exactly.
Like, I know what you're saying, but I don't know what you're saying. And then I began to play around with it and see how often I was mixing creativity and productivity. And that was getting me back into that shadow, because the productivity is like, I want control, structure, etc. Creativity is, I want to feel free. Both of them need to be honored. And the primary vitality comes from the creativity. The productivity part actually passes pretty quickly if the creativity is honored. It's that thing of struggling to, we've probably all had this experience writing something, struggling to find the words to say, and you could spend 3 hours struggling and then be out taking a walk. And then suddenly it's like, oh, I know exactly what I want to say. You rush home to write it all down in 5 minutes. So how can we recognize, hey, if I'm sitting here for 3 hours and it's a struggle, I'm trying to bridle the horse too quickly. Slow down a little bit. Let's go do something else. There's a reason why as soon as you take the walk, that's when you go, I know what I want to say, Yep. More practically speaking, the habit that somebody could bring to try to honor both of these would be, what we've been talking about across episodes of giving space, the habit of having a certain time or a keystone tripwire. Whenever I go to this place or do this thing, I allow myself space for this, even if it isn't always at the same time of day, so that I can just say whatever's going to happen in this creative space is what's going to happen. I'm not trying to do anything with it yet. I'm not setting an agenda for it yet.
I love that. I also think that I probably have to invest in a horse now.
There are so many different metaphors we could probably go with, but you're in Petaluma, there's horses around, right?
and who knows, maybe I just need 3 hours of me and a horse in the field and see what comes out of it.
Well, and the other thing to try too is I've done this before where if I was really, really creatively blocked, I mean, literally, well, and I do this actually now in my calendar. I mean, I have 1 week a month, no appointments, because those appointments, as soon as they start stacking up, I mean, it fritters away all the other little pieces. So I have a week of no appointments. And when I don't have appointments, the nice thing is, and especially when I put it into my calendar, that's when I get, how might it be said, replenished,
Yes.
I mean, it's a fact of life that there are certain productive things we need to do. I need to do my laundry. I need to pay my bills. I need to show up for the appointment with you. That's the productivity, for this recording. These are practical things that everybody has to do in their life, but I choose to consciously separate out. There's this other time that has no appointments, that has no laundry, that has no anything, and it's just open space. And instead of regarding that as a waste of time, I see it as, that metaphor I used earlier of the germination taking place underground. Something is happening. I can't always see it. And I certainly don't always know what's going to pop up above ground. But I have done it the other way enough times, the kind of very capitalist machine way of sit down, produce that, and seen that not go anywhere good enough times that it's like, okay, all right, well, I don't know how many times I needed to hit my head against a wall, but apparently I needed to hit my head against a wall that many times before I got it. So what I hear you sharing is your own learning about that process and what it is you really need. So an actionable item, if we were in a traditional coaching relationship, would be, okay, Andy, what do you need to do with your schedule to make sure that you have that time where you don't have to produce anything, but it's just, I get to be Andy futzing around with my equipment or taking a walk or whatever the thing is that's going to be generative for you.
It all comes back to setting ourselves up for the best success that we know how to do for ourselves, rather than blindly adhering to a convention that has worked for somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And you started the top of the call with, here's what I learned about my own process. It's like, yes, those are the wins. Those are the wins.
It's certainly setting with me. And I'm constantly looking forward to how these tools, they seem to always come out right when I need them. And they come out in my defense rather than being hindrances. And that's to say, I think we are pretty good as creating our own blocks, but we're also very good when we're focused on it and creating our own solutions to those exact blocks.
Well, I want to acknowledge you for the reframe that it comes out for the best instead of a hindrance, because somebody else could just as well have the capital S story or internal narrative of like, yeah, but I mean, God, why do I always do this? I mean, it's like, it just keeps coming up again and again and again. And I empathize with the suffering someone with that story is experiencing. It's really hard to feel all the things that you feel when that is your story. I hear you, Andy, deciding to really consciously say, yeah, there's going to be stumbling blocks. I'm going to self-sabotage. What else is new? But at the end of the day, these are learning opportunities. They're not hindrances.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Courage Habit Podcast. And thanks to Kate Swoboda for joining me. You can find her book, The Courage Habit, wherever you buy your books. Please shop local when you can. You can also find out information about her, the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program, and other resources at yourcourageouslife.com.
And you can find out more about Andy and his work at audioephemera.com. That's audio ephemera, EPHEMERA.com.
Subscribe to this podcast to get all the episodes and share it with a friend. Also, please rate the show and leave a review as it helps others discover the podcast. Join us next episode when we continue our conversation about building a courageous life.